Like it's one thing to say we need to be exposed to fair competition. It's another thing say that we want to expose ourselves to essentially price gouging,
Yeah.
which are pretty much universally recognized as anti-competitive tactics. So
So let's get started with this. Lots of big breaking news that happened literally this morning. The first one is TESA China says that construction on its new Shanghai Megapack factory is now 45% complete, just 3 months after construction started. Just 3 months. It's already 45%. If you extrapolate that, it could be done in 6, 7, 8, 9 months. But this is way faster than the 1 year it took the first Megapack factory, which is already a big speed. So they shared a progress photo as well as the rendering of what it will look like when it's complete. This is Grace Tao, global vice president in China. This is her Weibo post that she did in China to explain all this. And it's a $200 million factory. The initial capacity is 10,000 units per year, which is 40 gigawatt hours, which is it's the same as what Lathrop was. $10 billion for revenue per year from this one factory. It says it covers an area of 200,000 square miles, and they're going to export these megapacks to overseas markets, including Asia Pacific future. This is what it looks like today. This is just 3 months after it started at just unbelievable speed. And this is what it'll look like as we get going. What's your thoughts on all this, Hans?
yeah, so one of the things that I was looking at was just the size of this thing. This is much, much larger than the Lathrop Mega Factory, which is roughly 40,000 square meters. And so this one that is going to be 200,000 square meters is going to be roughly 5 times the footprint of the Lathrop Mega Factory. And so, that's where I would key in on her statement that its initial capacity is going to be the same capacity that Lathrop has. And I expect that to scale far, far beyond just that 40 gigawatt hours. I mean, if we just base it on footprint, we could be talking about something that is 5 times, up to 200 gigawatt hours instead of 40 gigawatt hours. But the other factor that you should put in there is that Lathrop does import these batteries pretty much as is. And so I don't know if there's going to be any sort of cell manufacturing that's included in this footprint. If so, they may end up vertically integrating a little bit farther and putting some equipment that's currently in China already in some other factory, adding some capacity in their own. So I don't know that this 200,000 square meters is going to give us a 5x, a 200 gigawatt hour total capacity in the long run. But it's definitely going to be, whatever it is, it's going to be significantly more than this initial 40 gigawatt hours, which leads to very large numbers in revenue over the long term. And I believe there's going to be a very strong amount of demand for the mega pack in China. This is something I've been looking forward to for a long time. That in the US right now, the difficulty for Lathrop in ramping up revenue is that we have these very long interconnect queues in all of the energy providers, the utility companies that you have to connect these things to the grid. And that's something that I extremely like. I think it's very, very doubtful that inside of China that there will be long wait times and lead times to get these things connected to the grid. I would expect that to be, half, a fifth, maybe a tenth the amount of time to go ahead and get these connected up. And if that is true, then we could see an incredible ramp up, not only in production, but a much, much faster ramp up in revenue from the Shanghai mega factory for whatever is sold domestically there in China. Anything that's sold, into other markets, you will probably see something that is much more akin to the types of wait times we have here in the United States. But all of those things are factors to kind of keep in mind and just realize that we may be looking at the construction of basically a cash factory in Shanghai that is on par with when we built out the original Shanghai Gigafactory for vehicles.
And you saw that the factories, look at the stage, how fast it's moving now. This is current. And so the megapacks I saw was 80,000 pounds a megapack. And so you need to build these factories locally in the country that you're selling it in. But don't you think that if it takes them this is 3 months to get it up to this stage, 45% complete. Let's say they get it done in 9 months, 100% complete. in 9 months. Um, like Tesla said, factories is our real product. And so they will probably pump these out, right? What's your expectation of how many megapack factories they'll actually launch?
Yeah, I mean, China just builds fast. Like we saw this, it was much faster to build the Shanghai factory than it was to build in Berlin or in Austin. Austin, was relatively quick. Um, but so that is going to be one factor. It's going to go much faster here in Shanghai, I think, than it would anywhere else in the world. But that said, it's a much simpler factory to build than something like a gigafactory. And so I think we should expect, I mean, there's a very real possibility that this could be producing megapacks inside of 8 months, maybe less. And we may be able to extrapolate that and say, okay, maybe in other countries we can do this in roughly a year or whatever. The thing about any other country besides China that is difficult is that the local supply chain in China to produce these mega packs is by far the best supply chain in the entire world to do this. It's going to be easier for them to set this up in China than it was for them to set up the Megapack factory in Lathrop, just because there's, like I said, a lot of stuff that ends up having to be supported and is supported by a supply chain that is in China. And that's one of the reasons why it's so silly to try to export Megapacks from Lathrop to China, is like you're shipping so much of this material across the ocean to the US in the first place to assemble it into a megapack, only then to turn around and ship it back to China. Like all the stuff
Mhm.
just needs to be made in China and then sold in China for, from the megapack standpoint. And, the same for cars. This is why we don't export Teslas from here to China other than, maybe a few Model S's and a few Model X's. Like it just doesn't make economic
Yeah.
sense.
Love it how this megapack factory, look how it looks. It's going to look like a battery. It's got the little thing at the front here. Awesome. Okay, other big news that came out, news story that was just launched or published this morning, announced this morning, was the European Union is slashing the planned tariffs on the China-made Tesla electric vehicles. And they're also doing it for the other firms, but as you'll see, the other Chinese automakers, they only cut it by at the most 1%. Tesla was anticipated to be at the 20.8%, which is already much lower than the 35, whatever it was, for the tariff that they're doing for imports of electric vehicles, but they've reduced it to 9%. So imports to the EU is now just 9%. This is because of Tesla lobbying for it. Here's the other Chinese electric vehicle manufacturers. They also got adjusted tariff rates, but look at this. BYD is a favorable 17%, but it's only down from 17.4%. So they didn't really budge much. Look at Geely, which makes Volvo 19.9% to 19.3%. But for SAIC, they kept it at 36.3%. And, this is, I think they said in a previous report that it's based on their cooperation. I don't know. Maybe it's because, both Geely and SAIC are government owned from China. So I'm not sure why. But still, BYD is 17%. So they've got a lot more tariffs than they did Tesla. So in June, the EU announced that they were going to slap higher tariffs on the Chinese electric vehicle imports, which it found benefit heavily from unfair subsidies. That China is subsidizing them, so you can't just bring them in. It's not really this market forces as people think. A threat of economic injury to EV producers in Europe. And then this Tuesday, its draft decision to impose definitive countervailing duties. This is it, what they showed, this new plan. So this is what they have. What are your thoughts about this?
Well, I think it's very interesting when you look at it, and I have no idea. We're talking about government agencies, and so their ability to assess this information and know this information, or for their policies, even if they did know this information, to reflect reality. This may or may not be what we're looking at, but if they've got roughly 40% tariffs on SAIC, and what they're saying the justification for that tariff is the amount of subsidy that company is getting from the Chinese government, you almost have kind of a rank ordering here of how much money is flowing from the CCP into these automakers. And so it would make sense from an outside perspective that Tesla, out of all those companies, they're receiving the least amount of support
Right.
from the CCP. According to this, it would be still not zero support. And perhaps that's fair. Maybe there's just the ecosystem that's set up and all the suppliers. Maybe Tesla is kind of an indirect recipient of some CCP support, whether it's to their company or really just in their supply chain. And I would think it'd probably be more in their supply chain. But if you look at that, I think all of those numbers make sense. I think BYD being the closest wholly owned Chinese company to being profitable, they're probably receiving the least amount of subsidies from the government. I don't think SAIC is anywhere close to that. And so I think that would, at least hypothetically, I think those
Yeah.
numbers may realistically reflect, that amount of subsidy that's being received by those companies. And if I
Makes
was
sense.
in the EU, I would feel like, okay, if the CCP is the one that is able to essentially subsidize these products in my country, I wouldn't want to force my, homegrown companies to face, like, it's one thing to say we need to be exposed to fair competition. It's another thing to say that we want to expose ourselves to essentially price gouging,
Yeah.
which are pretty much universally recognized as anti-competitive tactics. So I think all of that basically, it makes sense if the reality on the ground is what the policy suggests.
Yeah, I thought like your explanation. I think it really does make sense. And then the last bit here says it comes after Elon Musk, electric vehicle maker, made a substantiated request to the EU that planned tariffs on its China-made EVs to be recalculated, right? Because they, like you said, they don't get as much subsidies at the company. That makes sense. So this guy, Brian Basson, put this post, and I thought I was good. He said the gap between Tesla's total revenue versus the automotive revenue is widening because Tesla Energy is starting to take a larger share of that gap. Tesla Energy generation storage revenue, $3 billion, surpassed that of services and other revenue, $2.6 billion, for the first time in the second quarter of 2024. And it says here, during the first half of 2024, Tesla Energy generated $4.65 billion versus $4.88 billion for services and other revenue, a gap of only $203 million. And then during the second half of 2023, this gap was still $1.32 billion. So they're really catching up to services. And in fact, the last quarter, they surpassed it. With Tesla's Giga Shanghai Megapack factory starting production by Q1 of 2025, should take the lion's share of this gap in 2025. So it's a nice table that he posted here. You can see that in red is the total revenue for Tesla by year. And then the blue is the automotive revenue. So, 2019, 2020, automotive revenue basically is the same as total revenue, right? It was basically at 2021. Then 2022, you can see that total revenue, there's a jump. And then here you can see that it's widening. And then you pointed out to me, I was trying to understand what this was, that this is mid-year. And so this is just by Q2. We don't know yet the full year, but Elon did say that total revenue for Tesla will be over 100 billion he's expecting that for 2024. So this red will go up here by the end of this year, and then this blue will go up here somewhere. And so Tesla Energy could separate out even more.
Yeah, I think the presentation on like the information here is great. The presentation does leave a little bit of room for improvement. If he had included, quarterly numbers on or even just summed up the numbers for that first half of the year in the previous years, then you could connect these dots and make it look much more continuous. And I think that would help people to understand what they're looking at here a little bit better. But like you said, yeah, this gap is continuing to grow. We've already got, a pretty big gap for the first half of the year, that 37.13 billion number on automotive revenue so far versus 46.8 billion total on on total revenue. And so you've got a little under $10 billion worth of revenue that's coming from non-automotive sources on a number that's less than 50 billion. So, that's very significant. And I expect as Lathrop continues to ramp the rest of the year, that we could see that number continue to grow rather than shrink. And so it is the beginning of, the numbers really demonstrating how much Tesla is
Mhm.
more than an auto company. And the other thing that we will see hopefully here in the next 2 years in a very large way is then the, software services portion of
Yeah.
this revenue just taking off in a very
Interesting,
nice
isn't it?
exponential
Yeah.
way.
It's possible that the yellow service is another will surpass the green very quickly.
Yeah, yeah, if that's
Uh,
where they decide to put the software revenue from FSD, then
it'll be
yeah,
connected together for a while, and then all of a sudden, the software's revenue will just
yeah,
skyrocket past the energy. But energy is going to be eventually this energy green is going to be as high as this blue right here in about 3 years. Uh, that's the expectation. So we'll see.